All right, welcome back to another episode of Reviews with Bro, where I'll be reviewing one of my favorite bands of all time and their new album, Give Us the Moon by Night Flight Orchestra. Now, a little bit of background on this album. Back in 2007, Bjorn Strid and David Anderson of Soilwork were touring, and I believe it was with Archenemy, and they got in a discussion with their bassist at the time about what they considered to be classic or not from rock and roll, particularly like culture, stories, music in general, and they thought these strange stories and conspiracies, whether they were true or not, needed a soundtrack. And so they joined forces together to essentially try and reclaim the sounds and melodies of the 70s and early 80s. Now, the sound is mostly referred to, or it takes after at least classic rock or AOR, with later albums, including disco and funk music and more synth oriented sounds, and it culminated together and created the very own unique blend of all these elements. You can hear Foreigner, ABBA, Survivor, Toto, Deeppurple, REO Speedwagon, Boston, and Kiss all combined into one band. And I've kind of dubbed this space yacht rock, which I think is very apt for this album in particular, especially considering there does seem to be some theme or concept throughout the album of one single flight on an airplane or through space, however you want to interpret it. I felt a little let down by their previous aeronautics albums, but this album was a very true return to form, and you could tell that they learned from their previous albums and their experimentations, particularly in the sound quality itself of synths, because those albums were very synth heavy. What I love about Night Flight Orchestra is perhaps the individual elements and movements and melodies can be kind of predictable, but that transition into the next part of the song is not always where you expect it to go, which creates a very, almost like nostalgic yet very new and fresh journey throughout their music. And, they do take after AOR and classic rock, which is kind of criticized for being very, structured the same way all throughout. It's particularly with having always having a guitar solo, and this album uses less of those, opting to go with some other music passage or just a straight up like synth solo in some songs. Now, the first song I kind of combined two, Final Call and Stratus, because that first song on the album is a 30-minute intro. It's a spoken intro, and it's kind of like you're just waiting at the gate to board, and they're quite literally in the track itself are making a final call to the gate so you can get on board and start your journey. And the song Stratus itself reminds me a lot of the opener from Sometimes the World Ain't Enough, this time. And it's almost as if it's an improved version of that song. It's very strong, speedy start, it's a very strong and speedy start to the album that grabs your attention and makes me feel like I'm actually boarded this plane, this spaceship, and we are now taking off. And it feels like the emotional momentum you have on that initial takeoff going off the runway. Shooting Velvet, continues this energy as the journey is just getting started. It's a bit more of a predictable orchestration, and has a very fun guitar solo to boot, and it really packs a punch. Like the Beating of a Heart is definitely one of the more ABBA-inspired tracks on the song, with a very fun sci-fi intro that really makes you feel like you're floating in space, and then goes into this really infectious melody and riff with an even more infectious anthemic chorus, and it's a really, really fun song. Melbourne May I is another speedy track that brings back all the energy that you might have lost on that previous track, and it almost sounds as if the ship or the plane that you're on is the journey is getting a little shaky, and now the pilots are like having to lock in. This is what I imagine is in those kind of movies. Miraculous is a incredibly groovy tune that has me bopping my head and spinning around in my chair, which I imagine in my head to be the dance floor. And it has a really fun synth solo that goes into a really emotional guitar solo. It's not too shreddy. It's very tasteful. It's another, very, very much of a standout song from the album. Now, Paloma is my absolute favorite song on the album. Has a intro very similar to like the beating of a heart. It's very sci-fi, makes you feel like you're floating through space, and then it brings out everything Journey, REO Speedwagon, Foreigner, and the likes of those groups did really well, and added with contemporary production created this even more magical experience. It's an absolute banger of a dual synth and guitar solo that leads back into the chorus at the end of the song. And I think this song in particular showcases what I think the band does best. It really culminates everything that they've done with all the previous records, and it's just a great song, and I cannot get enough of it. Cosmictide is another great track. Has this really deep purple, almost rainbow-esque intro to the song with these really churning drums, and then it like somehow turns into this beast straight out of Kansas or Cheap Trick. Brings back all the energy and tempo lost from the very emotional Paloma. It's another infectious chorus and melody, and I can still hear those keys clacking away in my head. And the synth solo reminds me a lot of what Don Airy used to do in Rainbow. Give Us the Moon, the title track, is another disco extravaganza, and is an incredibly infectious chorus that still is ringing in my head. It keeps you grooving, it keeps you moving throughout the entire song, and it's another one of the songs that sounds very nostalgic, like you've heard it a million times, and yet it's still very fresh and a completely new experience. Now, empress, A Point of View, is the most ABBA-infused track on the album. Incredibly disco-filled. I can't get enough of it. It's one of the 3 songs that are on constant rotation. The bass is bouncing throughout the entire song, and it forces you to keep moving and grooving, much like in Give Us the Moon. And the melody itself in the chorus is also something I can imagine ABBA writing. And if you just swap out in your head Bjorn's voice for theirs, it would fit straight into, ABBA's discography. They might as well just credit ABBA themselves on this. Runaways is another, REO Speedwagon type song. I really enjoy like the actual sounds and synths of this song. It's not as particularly groovy as some of the other songs in the album. It's more of a straight up rock oriented type, but it's still fun nonetheless. And I very much have that like beginning synth. I guess it's a riff or melody that goes throughout the entire song, ringing in my head, much like many other bits and pieces from this album. Now, Way to Spend the Night is probably one of the weaker songs on the album, but it is another adrenaline-inducing song with an infectious chorus, pulsing riffs, and it's made perfectly for singing along. And besides that, there's not really much to write home about it. It's just a good, solid song, and just another great entry into another great album. Stewardess, Empress, Hotmess, and the Captain of Pain. It's another epic song from the band. By epic, I mean just clocking in over 6-7 minutes. I'm always a huge fan of Nightlight's longer songs, particularly the last of the Independent Romantics. From Sometimes the World Ain't Enough is my all-time favorite Night Flight song. And the song in and of itself, outside of the journey already taken on this album, it's like its own separate journey. And as the song unfolds and reveals more to you, it's kind of just over out of nowhere. It doesn't feel like it's 8 minutes long, and it sounds like as if Journey, Angel, 10cc, and Starcastle joined forces in the modern day to create one last hurrah, one last epic song together with all these bits and pieces from their discographies into one incredible epic with Bjorn's smooth, sexy voice. Final thoughts, it's another incredible album in return for the band, and it might just be my favorite of theirs, although that could be recency bias. The songs are very nostalgic and yet very fresh and new and interesting and entertaining. And I've said that a couple of times throughout my review, but it's so true. Like, it could easily have been from the 80s, but you can tell that it's released, especially with the production value released, just the other week. I have to give it an 8.5 out of 10. It could easily, for me, be album of the year. My top 3 tracks are Paloma, Paris Point of View, and Cosmictide. I would love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. What were your favorite songs? And before you enter that in the comments, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.